Welcome to another episode of the Reedman Report, where we discuss issues related to risk, security, technology, and education. One of the issues I wrote about recently was the students at William and Mary voted almost unanimously, nearly 90%, to end two surveillance technology contracts on their campus. And so to learn more about what happened and why that happened, I'm joined today by Danny Otten. He's the VP of the Graduate Student Association at the College of William and Mary. He's also a PhD candidate in computer science, which makes him very well qualified to talk about issues related to technology, surveillance, and artificial intelligence. Danny, thanks for taking a few minutes to talk with me today.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So, Danny, this hit the news about 3 weeks ago that the students had voted to end these contracts on college campuses. College students have a lot of power to make decisions about the things that affect their day-to-day life. How did this issue come to your attention, and what started to make you kind of worried about these contracts the university had entered into?
Well, I might push back a little bit about just how much power college students have here, but maybe we can discuss that a little later. I actually learned about this kind of through a fluke. Someone I'm in a group chat with happened to see a Facebook post from the university police department saying that they were testing a new firearm detection system and that police would be walking around campus with a, I think, fake rifle to test that the AI surveillance system was working correctly. And so this made this person in the group chat somewhat concerned and suspicious, and they submitted a FOIA request in order to gather more information, which they then shared with me. And I started looking through the contract and the purchase order, the website, and I just caught a bit of a brainworm because I saw quite a few red flags that jumped out to me immediately, and then I continued researching and eventually brought my findings to the student assembly and student body as a whole.
What were some of those red flags that jump out, and kind of from your experience with the evolution of AI, like how does this kind of fit into the array of products that are out there? What made you nervous about this one?
Well, now that I've spent a month or a few months researching this, I've got quite a few different answers. But what really grabbed my attention right off the bat was how I was looking at Zero Eyes' website, and I saw that they did not release their accuracy data. They didn't have anything about their false positive rate. They even had a question in their FAQs about this specifically, but then chose not to answer it and choose some non-committal answer that, oh, we're always improving, we're always collecting data to get better. And as a scientist specifically who believes that transparency with any system you build and design and release into the world is very important, this was a red flag. And when we consider that the public safety aspects were supposedly trying to use this to protect people, having such an important piece of technology that we can't even confirm how effective it is seemed like at least worthy of significantly more investigation. And so that was probably what really kicked me off into putting a lot more work into that investigation. And then I found quite a few more issues besides that which point toward privacy and effectiveness concerns.
Yeah, and that gun detection technology is really based on the late 2010s image classification software. And that was, when we think about AI, we've had a lot of different generations of the things that people think about as AI, but that's really just the layman's term for it. Image classification is taking a 2D image and training a program to recognize the relationship between pixels in those images and then make a probabilistic guess that what is in that image, those relationships of pixels, are what you're classifying something as. And that started, with animal classification of, is this a cat or is this a dog? And this technology really kind of sits on that. From your work and research, kind of what are some of the limitations that just image classification hit the wall with?
Well, admittedly, I think I have a decent overview of this subject. I took a few classes relating to it in graduate school, but it's not my primary area of research, so I'm more operating with just the baseline knowledge, I guess you could expect computer scientists to have. Obviously, with any technology like this, there's always going to be a concern of false positives. It recognizes the relationship between pixels, but it can't really understand the overall image, at least not in the way a human can. So if it's looking for firearms specifically, then it's going to do anything that looks, it's going to see anything that looks like a firearm and throw a positive detection. I recall reading an article where the co-founder of Zero Eyes said that it detects strollers because the frame is similar to an AK-47. And so, there's debate to be had about whether or not that's actually worth it in this scenario. I would argue no, that kind of invalidates the technology to a certain extent, but it's definitely always going to be a concern, at least with our current crop and techniques for building these AI models.
And it's not a cheap contract to enter into. The William and Mary contract was listed at about $82,000 a year. So that's essentially an entire student's tuition at a pretty small school is going to this. And when you think about what a a graduate research assistant that could be working on a publication every semester is usually around $20,000. So that's four different graduate students that you're not funding because that money's going to the technology. A junior faculty member is usually in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. So that's about 80,000 with benefits. That's an entire faculty member that you don't have teaching classes and working with students. Or on the wellness side, that's the salary and benefits for a social worker or for another school nurse. So these are very significant amounts of dollars for something that really has kind of questionable effectiveness. When you started talking to other students, what moved this from your kind of personal research project into something where you realized the student body would take action on it?
Well, I think as I started researching more and at least pouring a few hours each week into this, a part of me realized that students probably would be interested in this. Obviously, I try to stay informed about what's going on in the community, especially as it relates to computer science. But I probably wouldn't have spent so much time looking into this if I didn't think the students would be invested. So yeah, there's the opportunity cost aspect of it. I don't know exactly how funds are earmarked and allowed to be spent necessarily, but yeah, even if they couldn't send it to use it for hiring more researchers, which I think honestly, with that amount of money each year, you know, Zero Eyes was probably built on an open source image classification model, and we could probably use some of our world class CS students here to build a very similar system if that's really what the Office of Public Safety values. But in addition to that, and what I thought would mobilize the students more is the privacy concerns, because they installed the system, only really told people through a Facebook post where they didn't even say the company's name or release any additional information. But then I started looking through the contract and see, okay, they have 400 cameras all around campus that they're accessing, and they have the perpetual license to use this footage for any business operation into the future. So we are essentially selling the likeness and movements of the William and Mary community. Well, not even selling, we're giving it away for $80,000+ a year. And especially when I see very little evidence that a system like this actually would be effective at increasing public safety, that certainly doesn't seem like a worthwhile trade-off to me. And based on my referendum, the students agreed after I distributed that information to campus about it.
Yeah, I'd be interested if parents or school administrators or other folks that these contracts are with a lot of K through 12 schools and a lot of K through 12 schools in more rural areas where it's unlikely that somebody on the school board or somebody involved in the school administration has a really deep understanding of either all of the legal implications or all the technological implications of having a company own all of your image data. I mean, what we're seeing right now from the biggest tech companies is they will spend almost any amount of money to get more video and image data because that is the digital gold for training the next generation of models. So when companies like OpenAI and Google are paying people to wear basically GoPros on their head to record everything that they're doing, all day to be able to train 3D models, to be able to train robotics models. The fact that you have schools and universities that are literally paying a company to also have all of that data could be sold to the highest bidder at any time, and I don't think anybody realizes that. Like, how valuable is that 3D video data?
Well, I might want to push back a little bit. Based on the contract, there might be certain legal interpretations that allow them to just sell the video raw. And obviously, I'm not in the habit of trusting big tech companies to do as they promise with data, based on many past examples. But even if they can't just straight up sell all the video data, they can still use it for their own training AI models, potentially future like facial recognition models if they want to do branch into that market. And the contract explicitly allows anonymizing the data and then selling it that way. So they might not be giving away all the video information specifically, but they could look at how people are moving, what people are wearing, sell that to like advertising companies, stuff like that. And that's probably one of the most benign ways you can use that. I haven't looked into all the various ways this could be misused because I've been more focused on just preventing it in the first place. When it comes to K through 12 schools, it's definitely a similar situation that I'd generally be against having it there, but there are some notable differences. For example, William and Mary has a 400 camera contract, but we also have a 400-acre campus. And so even assuming the best 4K security cameras and no obstructions from the buildings and the various levels of buildings, as best I can tell, 400 cameras covers less than a fifth of the entire campus, and probably less than a tenth, which means that even in the event of an active shooter scenario, the odds that it happens specifically where Zero Eyes can see and notify people is very small. Whereas, my high school, it was basically just one building and a couple extra fields and such for sports. And so if you have a similar contract, you might be able to more reasonably cover like 80% of the school with this technology, and hopefully more often get a reliable notification about it. Whether or not it would still be effective at preventing a shooting, I would still lean against it, because up until you pull it out of the backpack, up until the camera can see it, the system is functionally worthless. And at that point, you have until the camera sees, from when the camera sees until the trigger is actually pulled for the police or whoever safety officer is in charge to get to the scene and prevent the crime, which in the vast majority of scenarios seems like a few seconds to at least cross a building, which is not viable for most people in most situations.
Yeah, and the couple real world examples that have happened in the last 2 years at schools that either had, the company we're discussing or other similar, they're now probably at least 20 or 30 different companies that are offering, an AI gun detection software for CCTV cameras. There was a shooting at Antioch High School in Tennessee, and at in that shooting, there was a camera in the cafeteria, but when the student pulled the gun, he was far enough from that camera that there was not enough detail to be able to detect the gun. Because if we're thinking about back to relationship between pixels, if you have even a very high quality camera, but you're 50 feet from that camera and you pull out either a cell phone or a gun, there are only going to be a couple pixels that are making an edge, and making a determination about, is this a gun or is this a cell phone? There's just not enough data to tell that, these 10 pixels against this border have that type of situation. And what we have seen is false positives at schools that have had very significant impacts at students. In Baltimore County, Maryland, there were some football players who were sitting outside in front of the school after practice. And next thing they know, a whole bunch of police cars come flying into the parking lot. Officers with guns drawn tell these high school kids to get down on the ground at gunpoint. And that was because a Doritos bag that looked kind of shiny and silver at a far distance from the camera was identified and flagged as a gun by this. There was also a high school in Texas where students were taking the SATs, and in the middle of the SAT test, it has to be canceled for them to go on lockdown. And that was because a student walking on a path lined up with a shadow and the shadow was kind of in a straight line along his arm, and that shadow was then interpreted as a gun and dispatched as an active shooter. So I think the danger that people need to realize is when police officers respond at 100 miles an hour to a campus for a false alarm and show up with guns drawn, anything that that officer interprets as a threat. And there are many, many studies of officers who've accidentally shot people with wallets, people reaching into their pockets, people in the dark that they misinterpret the situations. You're now having a real gun pointed at a student, posing very real harm to them. Did that come up kind of in any of your discussions with the student assembly about this?
It's definitely been a factor in my discussions with student assembly, other students, and the director of public safety to the extent I've discussed this with him. Not as much as maybe it should be, because I think the privacy concerns are the more salient issue to the student body, and better for making the case potentially. And at the same time, it is very difficult to say what would happen in one of these situations. I like to think the student body currently has a pretty good relationship with the police department. I certainly haven't heard of any severe examples of the police department overreacting or abusing their authority in my 5 years here on campus. But it's always a possibility, especially when you introduce new technology that it seems to me they don't fully understand and might be more likely to overreact to. And so just increasing that chance is unlikely to do the community good in the long run.
Yeah, then on a college campus, thinking back to the shooting at Michigan State a couple of years ago, that took place after hours in a classroom building and the student union, and then the adult shooter walked away from the campus and commit suicide before, any of the police officers had arrived. But police get this report of an active shooter at the school, and that brings officers from dozens of different agencies, the federal agencies, the state police, all of the neighboring jurisdictions. And now you have all of these plainclothes officers around the campus with guns. Students have heard there's a shooting. It took about 5 hours to resolve the situation at Michigan State, even though the shooter was dead in the first 2 minutes, because now you had so many plainclothes officers with guns. I can see a situation where a false alert happens on a campus, a whole bunch of responding officers, many of whom are in plainclothes or their private vehicles, show up. Now those are getting other detections. Students are calling in saying, I see a person with a gun at this building. And you've literally taken a computer error and you've created fear and anxiety and disrupted operations of the campus for the minimum the whole day, but probably that whole week, because it's going to take a lot of time for people to kind of recover psychologically after they've thought they're in the midst of a mass shooting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting scenario and escalation that I hadn't considered before. I think it does depend on a few different factors you mentioned there, like the officers being plainclothed. Obviously, every officer is going to be in plainclothes sometimes, but I think our police department would probably show up uniformed, and also many different agencies responding at the same time. You're probably more familiar with police response um, protocols than I am, so maybe that's more likely than I considered initially. But yeah, that's certainly kind of the worst possible scenario that can result from something like this.
Kind of shifting from, so obviously this issue, mobilized the majority of the students against, AI surveillance. The vote was 89.6% of the students voted that they wanted to end this contract. I think that this is moving towards kind of a broader trend where a couple of years ago, there was a lot of optimism about what AI could be. But now, in just some polls that came out in the last 2 weeks, the majority of people now worry about AI, have negative thoughts about AI. What's kind of the broader sentiment that you're seeing between students? Because obviously, you're a computer science graduate student who's going to work and develop and research things in these, but also, the generation of students that are in high school and college now may not have entry level jobs because of a lot of the automation that's taking place. Do you see this as kind of more of a new generation's pushback against something that older decision makers are not realizing all the impacts of.
That's definitely a big part of it. And I, as a computer scientist, I try to remain aware of the many sides of AI. I see sometimes it's useful, potentially harmful, such as in these surveillance scenarios, but I use it almost daily for my own work. It's great for data analysis. It's great for searching up information. Obviously, just like anything on the internet, you can't always take it at face value. You gotta double check the important things. Um, but I think I have a somewhat nuanced view on this after using these tools for a few years and doing research on them. Whereas the rest of William and Mary, the majority of campus, is very creative focused. It's very focused on liberal arts, and so I think the average student on campus is predisposed to either not care about AI or feel very negatively toward it, as you were saying. So this definitely um, aligned with those concerns to a certain extent. Obviously, this specific AI probably isn't going to take their job unless their job was going to be looking at security cameras and trying to find weapons on them. But it definitely does bring the issue to the forefront of everyone's mind. Like, AI can disrupt my life even while I am still at school and I don't need to find a job. It's still being integrated everywhere, and it's something that's worth keeping an eye on because of that, and not necessarily accepting in every facet of society.
So this vote referendum came out of your research into the company and the contract, and then your ability to mobilize and educate and convince the students to take action. What would your message be to parents or school board members that are elsewhere in the country, primarily in K through 12 settings that don't have a lot of technical experience? What should they look for, and what questions should they be asking about a technology company that is pitching a contract for their campus?
Well, I think first things first, just don't take what the company says at face value. If they're trying to sell you something, they are going to most likely only give you the information that makes you more likely to do that. They might twist statistics, they might leave out examples of their past failures. And so, whenever you're making a big decision like this, which affects everyone in the community, because they are going to have their privacy violated to a certain extent from these systems, at least the ones that are sending all the information off to a third party. We can have a slightly different discussion about ones that are locally hosted, which, while I don't think would be particularly effective, are still more respecting of the community's privacy and hopefully more adjustable to the community's specific needs. But yeah, if you don't fully understand the technology, that's probably a good reason to take it slow and not rush into things. Obviously, I don't want to downplay the issue of gun violence in America. I wouldn't pretend to have all the answers, and it's a serious issue that hopefully we can address with through many different factors. But fact of the matter is, right now, there's, to my knowledge, not a single instance of one of these systems actually preventing a shooting. And so, as long as you're spending money on these public safety initiatives to actually make people safer, first things first, look at the data. Does this actually seem to make people safer, or is it just the talking points and the quotes they're giving you that are convincing you of that? And so, as long as that tension is there, probably err on the side of caution and spend your resources in a way that you can be more confident actually benefits the community.
Well, Danny, I want to thank you for your time today. You're very well informed. You're a great advocate, and I think that you're going to have an excellent future ahead of you. Um, if anybody wants to learn more about this, there's an article in the show notes about this vote and a couple articles about the background in this technology. So, Danny, thank you very much, and best of luck to you and the students at William and Mary.
Thank you for having me. Same to you.